Welcome to the Red Letters Podcast. In this podcast, we will explore topics that can be life-transforming while delivering a message of hope.
Thank you for joining us on this week's podcast. We were just having a little discussion, and this will be the topic for this week, and that's how do you, stepping into church, and after you kind of commit yourself to a church and you start stepping into ministry, there's hurdles and there's sometimes needs that people step into because they see a lack of something, and maybe it's not necessarily a gift, but people will step in to do that. And let's go ahead and bring this topic up. How do you step into ministry in a healthy way?
Oh, that's good. Well, I think you have to be healthy to begin with.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, we're not perfect, but
yeah. Or at least, what are your intentions? That's what I would want to know from individuals stepping into any ministry. What is their intention? Are they willing to follow the vision? Do they feel that they're being called by God? Or is it something that they believe, I can do this? I did it before, I want to do this.
I think it could be both, a little bit of both. You know, they could be that they're following the vision and they just want to step in and help, execute whatever that is. But I think as well that they could just do it because, I see myself doing this. Maybe they didn't catch the vision, but you know what, there's a need here. And I see myself doing that. I love doing it. And they step into it.
Ah, okay.
So I think a little bit of both.
Yeah.
and so, go ahead.
Oh, no, just because they're good at it, you think they should join that ministry?
Well, of course, it all goes back to their relationship and if they are whole and if they are well. But, no. Reverse that. That's not right.
Okay, go for it.
Let me think on that for a second.
No, because a lot of times I come across people who are joining ministry and they're like parameter that they're like looking at ministries like, okay, what am I good at? And that's what we were taught too. A lot of times, you're like, okay, well, these are the gifts God gave me. Where can I fit? But then there's some people like, I'm good at everything.
Yeah.
So then what do they do? So how would they navigate that?
Well, I think a lot of times people turn around and, especially if they've had a job or something like that, some of the positions they have at work, they assume that because they fill that position at work and they get paid for it, and they do a somewhat good job, at least, that it rolls over that, you know what, there's something similar at church, a ministry that kind of looks like that. So automatically, I know I can do that. And I think sometimes people will go ahead and do that and sometimes regret it because then they realize that, you know what, this isn't really a passion of mine. I'm doing it to fulfill a spot. And just because I do it at work doesn't mean that it just rolls over. So, the same because it doesn't. Go ahead.
Well, no, I think what you just said about passion, though, I think to be led by what are you passionate about? What do you see yourself doing other than work? Because I believe sometimes your work is your work. But I think there's other things that we have inside of us that we desire and that we actually see ourselves. Like God gives us dreams or visions. And I believe that those things he puts in our hearts so that we can execute them or, whatever giftings or whatever tools he's equipped us with to execute whatever that passion is or desire that we have to do. But I think that's more whatever you're passionate about is linked to whatever gifts you have that you can use in the body of Christ, if that makes sense. I don't know if I said that right.
Yeah. And not only that, I think some people, and just my experience being in church for a while, sometimes people will turn around and step into a ministry we'll just use children's ministry. Sometimes they're like, you know what, that just seems like the right thing to do. It's the nicest thing to do. You're sowing in the next generation. And I want to be that person that inspires. After they're there 3, 4, 5 months, they're pulling their hair out because what they wanted isn't what's kind of panning out because on that particular ministry, you don't always see the fruit right away.
Right.
But if you have a passion for it, and I think passion probably is a real good word for it, is that normally even your passion, once you step in, increases if you're where God wants you to be. And not only that, not that we're at all doing it to please people, but God will send people to kind of bring confirmation to you that, you know what, your gifting is working amazing in this department or in this ministry. So I think that's also something to keep in mind when stepping into a ministry, that try to make sure that it's something that you have a passion for, because you'll probably do very well there and be a blessing to so many in that spot. Because I remember when I first came to, when I first started going to church, I was that person that just stepped in to meet a need. Like in our first church, I want to say there was maybe 40 people. So I remember I was one of the guys that cleaned, and then I would lead the outreaches, lead prayer meetings, and then the drummer was going on Desert Storm, and he was the drummer, and we only had him as a drummer, so he showed me how to go. So I was the drummer for, I don't know, I think it was like 4 months until somebody else came in and knew how to be a drummer. So I did it, and I wasn't the best at everything. But initially, I just did it to meet a need.
Right.
But then as people came in that were better at those things, I was able to step back. So sometimes I'm not saying that you don't step in to meet a need, but you have to let yourself know that this is just for a short season, because you know that this isn't really your gifting, and try to manage it properly.
And I love that you said that, Tony, because you stepped into. Maybe it wasn't your calling, maybe it wasn't your strength, but you were willing to step into it. And as the body of Christ, I truly believe that we are all supposed to be there to pick each other up. I'm not saying, okay, I'm going to go run the children's ministry, because I know that's not my strength. I work with kids every day, and I've already raised too many. That is not my strength. It's like working with kids and having to cultivate their existence, even if it's for an hour, 2 hours, one Wednesday or one Sunday. It's just not for me. But if the need is there, I think we, as the body, should step up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be able to step up just to cover. And hopefully somebody comes in and takes over. They do, because it's somebody else's calling. It wasn't your calling. But as a body, I believe we're all called to step up.
Well, let's think about this for a second. Okay. Because I was thinking about what he was saying and what you just said about stepping up. But let's say, for example, like how he said the drums, right? There was a need, somebody needed to step in for the drums. But yet that wasn't his gifting. Right. He wasn't, he barely knew how to, hit the drum, beat, whatever. But what if, can you just be good with just not having drums for a season until God brings you somebody that can play the drums, instead of filling in certain needs if the people aren't there to fulfill that need, and that's not what they're passionate about or what they desire to do, right? Because sometimes you could be forced to fill a need, sometimes you could feel like you're being forced to fill a need. Like we were talking about earlier how this certain person was already contemplating, gosh, I don't want to go serve. Right. I don't want to go to church. I all these nerves and everything, starts riling up. What if that was like somebody who, I need you to, I'm going to show you how to do this beat on the drums, and I'm going to be gone, and you're just going to have to do the drums, right?
Yeah.
And this person's like, oh my God, but they do it not because they wanted to, because they in a sense felt forced. They were going to do it. I mean, how do you deal with something like that? Because I feel like we need to be sensitive to people, and I think sometimes too, we have to be comfortable with, we're just not going to have drums for now. Right. And I'm okay with that,
I've only ever served in one church. Excuse me. So I don't know how things are run anywhere else. So I'm just going based on business and then church. So to answer your question, the day has to go. Like we have to feed the people. There's children that are going to come in, so somebody has to step up. So in my opinion, the way that I see that's why you have structure and you have leadership. So as small or as big as something is, there's always someone in command. There's always that structure of leadership. So what I meant earlier was you don't just pick anybody. Like, Mary, get over here and play the drums because you look like somebody that could do it. For example, what I mean is our leaders should be equipped to be able to step in or they know their people. They know who's there and they know, oh, you know what? She played mute, for example. She taught music. I'm going to ask her and see if we could fill in. See if she wants to. You just present the idea. And maybe that person can't do it, but because of how God works, I know that person will know somebody that can come and fill in. Because church has to keep going. The ministry is going to run. Not because you are sick means that we're going to stop the service. God's still going to show up. That's just my opinion. That's how I see it. So I'm saying we're going to, as leaders, you have leaders because you have structure. So it's like the chain of command. Someone up there has to know who do we call and who do we put in place. And we're not just going to go grab somebody. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think 100% the conversation needs to be, like you said, presented, meaning that, hey, what does this look like? Because we have a need. And if this particular person, you have the conversation to see if they're willing and able to do it without assuming that, they're going to say yes for a long duration of time. One thing that I do know for a fact is that in Psalms it says, send help from the sanctuary. So I believe that the help you need is in the church. Just some people are hesitating, stepping up for whatever reasons they have. But for let's just say it's a new pioneer work. It's a small church that doesn't have everything. Initially, somebody will, whether they feel the passion or not, might have to start with the children's ministry so that the service isn't interrupted with a lot of, babies that are crying and stuff like that. So to oversee something like that, some of those things need to take place for the good of the whole.
Right.
And those might be temporary or like a short season, stuff like that. But sometimes we have to fill in the gap, but you have to be okay with it. And that's why I think that conversation is so important. Like I mentioned about the drum part, I wasn't paranoid. I knew I wasn't gifted in it. I knew I wasn't the greatest, but I knew, hey, it ain't going to hurt me to just do this little minimum amount to kind of keep it going, because the guitar and all the singers and the keyboard, all that was overshadowing it anyway. It was more like a background kind of thing. So I was okay with that. But if somebody's not okay with that, then they are. I think actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think a lot of damage happens when we have people that say yes all the time. When people say yes all the time, just because now you're in church, by you saying yes, you're feeling that you're doing the will of God. Even though you might 5 minutes later, man, why did I say yes? I don't want to do that. I think people get hurt because they say yes too quick and they don't really give it thought. And then they want to blame the person who asked them because they kind of felt quote unquote pressured when it could have just been a healthy conversation. But because you decided to say yes, then you kind of deserve the situation you're in now because you said yes. But that conversation should be an ongoing one. If it's not a permanent thing, that conversation needs to stay on the table so that both sides know how to navigate that short season that they're stepping in when that might not be their passion.
Right.
Well, I think too, though, but it starts at home. If you're not letting Jesus fill your cup and you're not letting him fill you with him, and you're going to church and you're saying yes to everything, or even just saying yes to one ministry, but your cup's not being full, for me, that's really important, because I think a lot of people do step into ministry and say yes to everything, but a lot of the times too, and it reminds me of you and I, there was seasons where even I'm like, how do you say it? Home wasn't in order and we were serving, right? But we were doing it to kind of it was almost like a Band-Aid. We were using ministry as a Band-Aid to avoid what was going on in home. It was like, okay, let's go get, feel good for a moment because we're doing God's good deed, Right. And then we go home, but we're still the same. And then I've learned, because a friend of mine told me one time, a really, really close friend of mine, we were sitting down and we were talking about our marriages or our marriages, but she had mentioned something about another marriage. And she says, I just told them that, what, she needs to go and have Jesus fill her cup. She's not being satisfied with him first, because whatever's happening over here with her marriage, her husband,
Right.
if her cup was being full over here, filled here first, right? All this wouldn't be as chaotic as it is now. And it's both ways, husband and wife. If both our cups are being filled with Jesus first, right?
Yeah.
And then with each other, all the little tiny things wouldn't matter. And I think a lot of the times people use ministry to cover up what's really going on at home, to fill a gap.
Personal
It could be
life, yeah.
pride. They want the attention on them. They're doing it for themselves and not because they love God or because they're being filled with Jesus.
Right.
And I guess to go back is, can you be okay, even as a pastor or a church, with the fact that if you have people in leadership that aren't whole, right? That that their cup's not being filled on a personal level, right? Do you really want them being in leadership? Do you as a person want to be in that place if you know that you're not? Because that's where gossip, that's where all this stuff happens. And I think we have to have that discernment and be okay with, what, this ministry can hold on until we get this, taken care of. Because I think we if you have a lot of sick people in church, church hurt people, I notice that in churches now, you got people bouncing around because they're church hurt.
Right.
Right. But and they go to another church, but they jump into ministry, then they get hurt.
Yeah.
But it goes back to their cup's not being filled
Right.
at home in a personal level with Jesus. And I think, and lack of discipleship.
Right.
Right? They're not being taught. And so I think that's all I would say. I'd be okay. Like, if I don't have anybody to play the drums, then I'm okay not having anybody play the drums until they're better, because I think that God will move with or without the drums.
Right.
God will move with or without nursery. God will feel, God will bring the people, but sometimes we have to just step back and abide and wait on him, because it doesn't always have to be church as usual. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's just, God, I'm trusting you. We lack in this area, but I need you to bring me good, people that are spirit filled, that are led, that have a personal relationship with you, that are whole. And I know that you're not going to get perfect people. We're never going to have perfect people. But the biggest thing for me, it's like, and that's why sometimes it can affect church growth.
Yeah.
It can affect even people growing themselves, because we're not either discipling or we're not leading by or using discernment to discern, okay, well, what, this person,
Right.
maybe they shouldn't be there or something. You know what I mean? Or I don't know if any of that makes sense.
No, it makes sense.
Well, I think what you're saying is that in a perfect world, ministry should come from an overflow of your relationship with God. In a perfect world, I think that's really what it would look like, that people are ministering because they're so in love with God and they want to be an extension of him to help other people.
Well, I don't believe you're going to get a whole lot of people so in love with God.
No,
I think
said
people
in a perfect world.
in a perfect
That's
world,
what I said.
that would be nice, but it's not.
The problem is, I know that a lot of times people will step into ministry to make up for their lack of relationship with him.
Oh, that is
Yes,
so
that's
powerful.
That's
Yes.
what
I agree with
happens,
that.
is that they'll turn around and do because they think they're pleasing God by doing that, by saying, here, God, let me give you some acts of service, but I'm not going to give you me yet. And I think that's where the church hurt happens. And just like we had a podcast a while back, it's not that the church hurts you. It's normally either you sabotage yourself or there's a specific person or people that hurt you, but the church in general doesn't hurt you.
Right.
Because one thing that I know for a fact is that ministry will refine who you are.
Yeah.
It will help you to see who you are. If you let it, it will help you become a better person of character, because character is built within the structure of ministry, because you come across things, then you have to decide, what am I going to do? Am I going to harbor that and let that be a wedge and start getting a twisted spirit inside? Or am I going to handle it properly and go to that person and make sure that any issue we might have, that there's forgiveness there, that there's peace there, so that I can move on? Because I know that the biggest, or one of the biggest, or I've noticed that I've grown the most doing ministry because you come across so many different things and people.
Yes, and being in ministry, you got to be willing to have that relationship with God first so that you can be able to deal with people and all their different differences.
Yeah.
Because there is going to be a lot. But that's how God builds character. Like, how are you able to relate, or how are you able to respond to someone who's difficult, to someone who wants to challenge everything that you say? So I think, like you said, Tony, in ministry, our character grows and we become who we are called to be, because it's who shows up. In the middle of whatever challenge, chaos, it's who shows up. And what I mean by that is, like, who did Mary show up as? Was I yelling? Was I meeting that person where they were at? Or was I coming across as somebody that thought, I was full of pride and it's my way or no way? So it's that character building in ministry. But if we don't have God first, then we're just showing up to fill up something because we're not spending that time with God. And that makes so much sense.
Yeah. And in time,
Burnout.
burnout happens, but I think you actually snitch on yourself in time on where your heart's at.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think it's really important when people come in or want to step into ministry, we need to ask them where their heart is. And maybe if did you come from another church? Were you hurt in any way? And ask those sensitive questions, or ask questions before you allow somebody to step into leadership or any kind of ministry, and not rush in to have people step into ministry and not know who they are, because then you don't know what you're letting in and allowing to come in. And I think that's so important, because too many times you get people coming and going, and then you hear all these, a lot of times too, you hear a lot of people talking bad about the church and things like that. But really it's when they came in, they already had a wounded heart, or they just didn't they had a heart issue that wasn't dealt with, But I think too, it's lack of relationship with Jesus first.
Yeah, you need to tend the garden of your heart regularly, especially as you step into ministry. You're always going to have to tend the garden of your heart to keep them weeds out and stuff like that. Because I know, I remember hearing about a guy that came into a church and he had almost a resume to hand to the pastor and said, "Hey, just so you know, this is what I have to offer the church." And I thank God that the pastor never put him in ministry because shortly after that, they bounced.
Oh, wow.
They wanted a position. They wanted the spotlight. That's why they came.
Yeah.
And it exposed itself because they weren't willing to do some of the basic stuff. That was one thing. I remember another time being in a church where there was this person that loved big. They knew how to love on people. Their character was different. They were a little, at times, rubbed you the wrong way. But I ended up feeling God tell me, I sent this person to the church to make you guys better, even your character.
That's so good.
And so many times we can turn around and look at a person like that and say, "Hey, I'm going to do church, I'm going to do ministry with you, but I'm going to keep you at arm's distance because you rub me the wrong way, because you're too different than me, and you're a little too bold, not in a bad way, but a little, what do you call it? They just carry themselves a little bit heavier than maybe other people."
The confidence was a bit much.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably a better word. But when I felt God kind of speak to my heart that, no, this person's here to make you guys better in every way. They're not doing things that are wrong. They're not doing anything like that. But just because they're different, you still need to embrace it, because it's going to make me better and help me able to function with those kind of people as well. Because a lot of times doing ministry, you're going to do ministry with, like you had mentioned earlier, people that have their own stuff that they're carrying, whether it's their past, preconceived ideas, their idea of ministry that might not be the same culture as you have at the church you're going. So I believe that God will send and does send certain people to kind of rub you the wrong way to make you better.
To make you better.
Yeah. And we have to be okay with that because, you know, what is heaven going to look like?
Yeah.
They're not all going to be exactly like us. We're going to see people that we're going to be like, whoa, I didn't even know this person made it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we have to kind of, I'm being honest,
Like,
you know,
wait.
because if you and I were the judge, it might not look the same.
That's good.
You know what I mean? So
Well, I think when you get people like that, it's instead of putting them off to the side or ignoring them, you know, or avoiding them. I think those are honestly the better people too, because they become really good people down the road if you take the time to be intentional with relationship and discipling them. But I think meeting them where they're at. That's what I always, you know, instead of like,
Right.
I'm just going to meet you where you're at.
Right.
Because I was there one time, you know, and then just, okay. And getting to know them, building that relationship, and then earning that trust and that space to be able to share with them and disciple them and lead them in the way they're supposed to go. But it's just meeting them where they're at their
well,
level.
Not only that, think about this. This person, let's just say that has that extra confidence. You could turn around and, like I was mentioning earlier, you might want to have the tendency to keep them at arm's distance. But how much better could your life possibly be if you pulled them in closer and you realize that this is actually a great brother or a great sister, that, man, I'm so glad I pulled them in and I got closer to this person because they're an asset, a pillar to my life now. But too many times, because it don't look the way they don't look the way we want it to look,
We push them.
we push them away.
I wanted to say something really quick on, I'll go back to this probation and then, but I think with individuals that we can't relate to or we see an issue with, I say that's something more about the individual making the judgment. So in church, whenever we see somebody is like, why are they acting like that? I think what we should be checking is ourselves. My friend said something a long time ago. I was having lunch with her and she said it in Spanish. She said, "Lo que te choca, te checa." And I was like, oh, okay. And I walked away like didn't get it. But I don't know why it kept coming back. And I text her afterwards. I'm like, OMG, that little phrase that you sent me, that was so funny. I go, I get it. But I think Ida got it. Lo que te choca, te checa. Like, you get it. Yeah. But it's basically, if it bothers me, there's a reason it's bothering me. God brought it to bother me because he's waking up something in me that I'm not addressing myself. But it bothers me so much about her is because it's something that I'm still struggling with.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
A lot of times when we deal with people like that at church, it's like, check yourself. Don't make assumptions and don't judge somebody else. It's more about checking ourselves. And that goes for leaders and, you know, people in leadership positions. And the reason I want to talk about probation is I know that the church is not a job and I know that it is not an agency. But what I do know about it, that it's people serving people.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you think about the job that I got, they hired me, but there was an extensive background check for me to come in and be inside this building. And then after that, they sat me, not like literally sat me in a room, but I had to go through 3 months to prove myself. Is she going to stick around? Does she really know the job? Does she really want this? I was giving all the skills and I was giving everything that I needed to be able to perform the job. They didn't leave me just hanging there, but they said, you applied for this, you wanted this. We want to test you out for 3 months. Because that's, I don't know if most jobs, it's probation. And I've always wondered when I go into church and then the next week I see somebody serving, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. They must have known him or her. That's not the case. And then you see that they're not there. Then a couple of months later, they're not there. So I don't know if that's something that they do in church. I know it's something different, but where you do that, like I want this person, I'm not doing it. It is for the church, but it's more for, because we are the church. The individual is the church. So I want to make sure that this person is wanting this because they have a desire and a passion for it. It's not like I'm doing this, like we said, to avert attention from, I'm not paying attention to God and I don't have that one-on-one with God. But look, if I'm doing the children's ministry, what better thing could I possibly be doing? For example, if I'm running the women's ministry, oh God, look at me, look what I'm doing with the women. I'm checking all your women, God. I'm taking care of them. Like, but I don't have that time with God. So I don't know if churches do it, but I think that would be something that if people are willing, like, hey, I want to serve in the ministry. Okay, I want you to serve in this ministry, but this is how the steps that we would take for that.